Hello, and welcome to the Up Your Smile Game podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Brigitte White, and I'm so excited that you guys are here in this space with me. This is the beginning of a great journey. I am launching the Up Your Smile Game podcast to complement my new oral care brand, Dr. White's Bright Whites. I'm so excited to meet you all in the oral care aisle. And these conversations on Up Your Smile Game are with Black women in health and wellness, leaders and founders of their own initiatives, their own organizations, their own practices, and their own brands. Today, we are joined by Michelyve Petit. She is a speech language pathologist and a new author of BAM, the Tiny Brave Elephant. She's joining us to talk about her journey, what obstacles she's faced, and what she sees up ahead as she continues to thrive in health and wellness. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Dr. White.
Thank you so much for joining us. So, what I really want to do is I want to learn about your journey. So, if you could just walk us through the path and progression of your career and what inspired you to pursue speech language pathology.
Thank you, Dr. White. So, I honestly thought I was going to be a lawyer. So, when I was in high school, I had done moot court at Central High School, CHS. Shout out.
Central,
To
I'm an alum, Central High School, 255.
So I had done the moot court, and I'd done fairly well in that sort of like debate team-esque competition where you meet other high schoolers from around the country and you debate on given topics. And so after I've kind of gotten a taste of that, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm very good with, presenting my case, and law just seemed to be like a really good field. And so I got into Drexel University. My major was English. And then I shadowed a speech language, or not a speech language pathologist. I shadowed a lawyer, and I was like, well, I don't know if this is necessarily the path for me, because I've always had it in my heart, and I believed that I was going to be a wife and a mom someday. And so I wanted to kind of work in a field that would allow me the flexibility to be a present mom while also being a businesswoman or being in the field. And so while I was trying to figure out, I was in that limbo in about my sophomore, junior year, I had a mentor over in the School of Education, David Appleton, who referred me to the career of speech language pathology. He stopped me one day. He said, hey, I think you should look into speech language pathology. I think you'd be a good speech language pathologist. I had never heard of what that was. I was that day old when I found out that speech language pathology existed. And so he kind of got the ball rolling, and I found one at Thomas Jefferson Hospital. I shadowed her and was inspired, by what I saw. I saw a mixture of art, I saw a mixture of science, I saw a mixture of care, and I knew that that was something that I could pursue. And so after that, I was like, okay, speech language pathology is what I'm going to do. And so I applied that year. After I graduated, I didn't get in. I don't know if you know this, but speech language pathology programs are very difficult to get in. The cohorts tend to be small. And they're even smaller if you don't have a background in speech language pathology. So I was applying to get into post-bac programs where I would get caught up to speed, and the program is a little bit longer for me. And those cohorts are even smaller. And so I didn't get in. I was a little disheartened, but I kind of picked myself back up, found a literacy tutoring job in the DC area, and fell in love with the DMV. And I applied to schools again after I had fallen down. I applied to schools again. I got into LSU, and that's kind of how I got my start. Yeah. And once I got my feet on the ground at LSU, I'm like, okay, I'm here to get this degree, learn as much as possible. And I think I truly needed that humbling experience. I think undergrad can sometimes give us this confidence of like, okay, I can pull an all-nighter and I can get the grades and I can do what needs to be done to get a decent GPA. But getting into graduate school is a whole other ballgame. I think it does require you to step your game up. And like having had that humbling experience, I had a hunger and a desire to, okay, once I get in here, I'm going to do a really good job. And I think I did. So that was my path into speech language pathology.
Michelyve, I think what you said, I want to, highlight the fact that two things you mentioned, which are so fundamental for people to understand. Number one, it's, you had to go through an experience, and we always feel like it's a setback, but it was just part of your journey, right? You applied to school, you didn't get the acceptance that you were hoping for the first time, so you had to reassess, recalibrate, get some other ducks in a row, and then you were successful getting into that program. The most important thing is for people to understand you're going to face a lot of brick walls, a lot of no's, a lot of doors will be shut, but that doesn't mean you have to you stop. You have to keep going, right? And I think that's really, outstanding. It shows that it's a testimony of your character and your perseverance. And then also for you talking about how you didn't have the experience in the space, right? So you had to figure out a way as a post-bac to get the experience that you didn't have. Particularly speech language pathology is developing so much, and now more awareness, more research is going into developmental disorders. So I just wanted to highlight and give you kudos for your perseverance.
When I was in grad school, so kind of shifting into that space it was different. I was in a completely new state. I didn't have any family. Thank God I found a church home and I had a church family, United Christian Faith Ministries. They really looked out and supported me and held me down. And, I was able to lock in to the courses and really try to identify, okay, what area am I going to go into? So it's speech language pathology is a wide door, but once you walk into that door, there are so many niches, right? There are so many areas that you can, you could better identify with. And so, I went in thinking, okay, I'm going to work with children. I'm going to be a pediatric speech language pathologist. But then I saw voice, right? Vocal pathologies. And so I worked at a head and neck cancer voice center as part of my outpatient clinics. And I fell in love with the science and the care and just the medical, kind of speed that goes into working in those sorts of settings. And so, those settings force a person to, in my opinion, to practice at the top of their license. I think that across every population, you can practice at the top of your license, but there's something about being in a hospital setting where you're hearing beeps and you're hearing codes and you're seeing someone fresh out of surgery that makes you, okay, I need to make sure I know what I am doing. I need to make sure that the practices and the interventions that I am dispensing are top line and I'm giving this patient my best. Because, lives are on the line, literally lives are on the line. And so I loved that. I loved that challenge and I sought to meet that challenge. And so after I graduated from the program, as the most outstanding graduate student, might I add, I went on to acute care setting in Springfield, Missouri. So again, traveling to a new place with no family, with no bearings, and going there solely for the purpose of pursuing this field and wanting to get as much experience as I could. Oftentimes, speech language pathologists have difficulty as a clinical fellow getting into those medical settings simply because it takes a lot of training. Oftentimes, hospitals aren't as receptive and open to bringing on a clinical fellow. And so that's why I had to apply far and wide and ended up in Springfield, Missouri. And so, I was a medical speech language pathologist at the height of COVID, and that was certainly an experience in and of its own. But I felt that was, again, another call to rise to the occasion and learn as much as possible about this novel disease and how to treat patients, because we continue to have to treat patients with dysphagia or cognitive communication deficits while they were in isolation units. And so that's something that I was proud to be a part of. And, it led me down the line of research, and that eventually caused for me to connect with a Black neuroscientist over at Johns Hopkins University, and she welcomed me into her lab. And so I worked in a neurology lab for a few months prior to getting to where I am today, which is a pediatric speech language pathologist. So I've had a very windy road, but I've collected lots of tidbits of experience that culminate to the clinician that I am today.
Yeah, it sounds like your background, all those experience were meaningful. You have founded your own practice, Compass Communication Group. Can you tell us more about that on taking? Like, what inspired you to go out on your own? And, when you talk about, niche areas of speech language pathology, is there any area that you specifically work with? Tell us more about your practice.
Okay. So if I'm being 100% honest, it was my husband who encouraged me, my now husband, who encouraged me to get into private practice. He saw the work that I was doing. Any friend of mine can tell you I am notorious for juggling 3 or 4 jobs. I'm Caribbean, so I will juggle multiple jobs. It's because if I see an opportunity to learn and to grow and it kind of piques my interest, I will fit it into my schedule. And so I think that my husband saw how I was wearing many hats, and he figured that I can put all those hats in one collective place and run my own practice. And so it's been a journey. It's been a journey of learning no's, learning to accept not getting responses back, learning how to just continue to try. I would say that starting off a practice, I have sent so many emails. I have so many scheduled emails that I send just to get the word out there, just so that people know who I am, what it is that I do. And being okay with, for every 50 or 100 contacts that I might make, I might get one person who's like, okay, sure, we'll proceed forward with speech language pathology or speech language therapy. And so my specialty is currently children ages 3 to about 12, working on early speech sound development, especially kiddos who have speech sound disorders, also early language. I find that laying down the blocks for early language are the most fun. There's a brilliant moment when a child is able to hear the word and identify like what you're referring to, and they look at your mouth and they look at what you're pointing to, and you're able to help them elicit that first word, or the 20th word. And so I think those vocabulary building blocks, syntax building blocks are fun for me for early learners, early speakers. And so, we specialize in pediatrics. There are a few adult programs that we're hoping to build and support. So specifically the geriatric population. Cognitive communication deficits are something near and dear to my heart. I find cognition fascinating. The brain is the epicenter of all things that we do. And I don't think that aging should preclude our ability to have all of those faculties. And so working with seniors on different strategies that they can use to support memory, to support attention, to support, pragmatics, kind of bridging that gap between social language so that, our elders can still be in the loop on the language it is that the younger generation is using. So I think those are some fun programs that are in the pipeline, and those are some of the offerings that Compass Communication Group has.
It's interesting you referred to, like, the youth culture and their flamboyant adaptation and incorporation of new words, and especially with all these technological devices, emojis and memes and sounds coming out that were not as traditional as older generations were using when they were actually developing their speech. And then the styles of communication, I think, especially as we are more sensitive to the learning styles and the ranges with developmental disorders or alternative learning needs, it's so important for the services to be available in terms of the speech pathology. In terms of funding, what challenges did you face in terms of finding capital to actually establish your company and get it off the ground?
As of now, it's all sweat equity. Whatever it is that I have made and saved, like personally as a speech language pathologist in my career, I have been using that to fund the company. So, I've looked at loans, but I think that speech language pathology, this field, there's enough opportunity to support kids that loans aren't necessary. um, Other speech language pathologists might disagree. I also don't have a brick and mortar, and so I think that takes a lot of capital. I think that can certainly cause for one to opt into getting a loan. What I've done is, again, it's the sweat equity, the money I've saved, I've used to slowly buy materials. So I'm slowly buying tests and test protocols, and those can be very expensive, and hearing equipment and games and books. And so those are things that I've been able to slowly accrue, um, to not be upside down at this point into the business. I do recognize that that pathway of taking out a loan and just having the suite of all that you need can be essential. And I think that many practitioners have done that, where they're like, okay, we're about $200,000 in debt, but now they've got a full suite. They've got marketing, they've got the equipment, they've got legal, they've got accounting, they've got an EMR system. They have literally a full suite, and those things I think all tie into the success of a company. And it might not be immediate, but it'll come year 3, year 4, however it might be. As for me, my start has been very, again, gradual and I guess a little less risky. So
Yeah.
that's how I've been dealing with capital funding.
It's important for our listeners to understand it's a full pie, right? There are some people who are going to, walk into the practice with their family. Some people do a friends and family round of funding, like crowdfunding within their own community, right? And this is similar in the dental space. I know that when I started my practice, my accountants were like, "Can you ask your family for some for a loan or for some investment?" And I had to really explain, like, no, my parents don't have any money to give me for my practice. They've had to like bootstrap their way just to get me out of high school into college. And certain communities, especially the Black community, who don't have that luxury of generational wealth, that does propel us in any kind of space, whether it's buying a home and of course starting a business. But your business is so essential to the community, to our community, and just the greater community. So I'm glad that you were able to figure out a way. And it sounds like it's really timely. Like you said, you don't have to have a brick and mortar space. You have digital capabilities. How is your digital presence? Do you feel like social media is helpful? Are you able to incorporate that with the type of speech language pathology needs? How has that been working?
Man, social media is such a powerful tool. I don't think that it's the end all be all. I think that oftentimes a new clinician or a person starting a practice thinks that they have to have a strong social media presence. Granted, it's very important, but there is power in that face to face interaction. Um, I think that oftentimes people might get pigeonholed into thinking like, okay, this person has X number of followers, and they're posting every day, and they're sharing tidbits. But what we really have to keep in mind as clinicians is that everything that you see on social media isn't, again, real. Okay. And also everything that is shared, we have to ensure that it's rooted in evidence. So, when we look at evidence-based practice, we look at, what the research says, what our clinical experience says, and what the patient is telling us. And so if a clinician is citing this strategy that she's using in therapy, that might speak to her clinical expertise, but it's our jobs as clinicians and pseudo researchers to look into how efficacious is this strategy? Like, how big was the sample size if there was a study that was done? Is it including a wide demographic? Like, does it speak to or include my client population, right? So I think that social media, again, is a powerful tool. I'm working on building up my audience and making content, but making poignant and very specific content, which is rooted in evidence, so that, viewers are able to learn something, but also have all the breadcrumbs that they need in order to do their own digging and do their own fact checking.
You made a good point, especially with the seriousness of your industry and the care that you're administering and how sensitive it is with the patient base. It is important for viewers to understand the difference, to be able to distinguish between expert, scientific, evidence-based information and, a 30-second essentially commercial or highlight on a social media platform. I always say, hopefully they are motivated to pursue more information after that. But unfortunately, some people, they're just guided by the bells and whistles of social media. So I'm glad that you are still keeping such a serious framework. But you have lent yourself in a creative way with Bam, the Tiny Brave Elephant, a children's book. And I really want you to talk about Bam. Talk about what inspired you to write this book and how your patients have received it. It's wonderful.
Okay, so as a fellow author, you understand the, I guess, the wrestle that takes place with writing a book, I think, or writing anything. Okay, so in my time as an English major, I will be fully transparent. Oftentimes, like, that writer's block it can be a pebble, but also it can be a boulder. And I felt like this was a boulder for a very long time because I had been writing stories in grad school. Like, I would have students who, had speech sound errors where they couldn't produce L. And so I'd make a story with a whole bunch of L's in it and pictures and things like that. And it wasn't an official book, but it's something that I had been doing for some time. And it crossed my mind, and it's something I'm like, oh, okay, I don't really have time for it. But again, by the guidance of a few friends. So I've got one friend, Dr. Bovell, who's also a speech language pathologist and business owner, who I'll have to introduce you to. Mm-hmm. She shared with me, like, okay, you should write a book. My husband's like, hey, you should write a book. Even like 5 years ago, my pastor was like, you should write a book. You're going to be a writer. And so I'm like, okay, I think this is the time. So I decided that I wanted to start with a children's book, and I wanted it to be accessible to early readers, early learners. And I wanted for the name to pop, but I also wanted for the name to be, speech science specific. And so hence we have BAM.
Hey, Bam.
Hey, Bam. So,
love it.
Thank you. So I intentionally chose B and M because those are bilabials. So bilabials are sound that are produced with both lips. And bilabials tend to be one of the more early emerging speech sound that a child will produce. So like N is common, N is not a bilabial, but B, P, and M oftentimes are some of those babbling sounds that you hear. And so I wanted for those sounds to be in the name, but I also wanted it to be in the final position of a consonant vowel consonant. So CVC words are often used with phonological awareness activities when you're working on blending or segmenting, or, just making the correct association from letter to sound. And so BAM was the name that I came up with. And I figured that BAM seemed to align with an elephant. I wanted an animal that was very cute, but one that I liked.
Smart.
And,
Yeah.
and I don't know too many people who don't like elephants.
Right.
And, who wouldn't like a tiny elephant that was brave?
Yeah.
And so BAM came to life, and I started writing the story, but in the scheme of rhyme. So again, rhyming is also a tool of phonological awareness. We want for kids to be able to identify rhyme, produce rhyme, and so the story is written in a rhyming format, intentionally, but also it's like Dr. Seuss-esque. Why wouldn't you want to write a story to the scheme of rhyme? And so, I wrote the story, and then I found a freelance illustrator who did an excellent job with the illustrations, but was also very patient with me, because I'm like, wait a minute, there's a red fox in India, like that. Those are the type of foxes that are native. Can you add that? Can you make the forest more lush? Actually, I'm looking at the map. Can you just add it to the book, please? And so he created this beautiful rendering, and I fell in love with this, and I thought that my readers would too. There was a point in time where you would open books and there used to be maps. I'm not sure if you remember this, but I have distinct memory in elementary school of opening books up with maps in them. It may have been a dictionary, or it may have been the Bible, but I would get lost in a map. And
I
I
love
thought
math.
that children might enjoy this too, and adults.
Yeah.
And so it's written for children ages 3 to 8. I designed it with parents and speech language pathologists and schools in mind, so that it's a tool that they can use and build into their curriculum as a way of helping support early language, but also social emotional elements of resiliency and friendship.
Wow.
Bam comes in to save his friend. Bam thinks that knows that he's small. He knows that he's different, but that doesn't hold him back. He still knows that there's going to be an opportunity for his difference to come in handy. And it did when he came in to save the day.
I love it. That is beautiful. And it's so well done. It's smart. Like you said, you really considered all these different aspects, not just regards to it as a learning tool, but also the emotional journey that the readers can take with BAM. And of course, the cultural, artifacts and elements of India, being indigenous for the elephant and all those characteristics. And I think what I do enjoy about children's books. I wrote Bright White's Dr. White and my teeth characters. I love that they are separate from humans, right? So as humans, we divide ourselves, especially now in this time. We put ourselves in boxes. I'm this color, you're that color. You eat that food, you pray that way. But when we have animals and other types of characters that aren't human, we can actually normalize them and take ownership of their journeys independent from our own, prejudices or preconceived ideas. That is wonderful. It's so smart, Michelyve. Go girl. Gosh, this
Thank
is great.
you.
And what a
Thank you.
great tool. Yeah, what a great tool to get yourself into these institutions, into schools, into curriculum. Like I think that's such a big part of your business model. I would imagine. How are you? What's your distribution like in terms of your book sales? Are you using online platforms? Is it Amazon, or are you going to book fairs like physically?
Yeah, so I've been working with independent bookstores to get the book on the shelf. Distribution is tricky, only because there are great companies out there that will take the book and print the book for you and get it into different bookstores. The setback is that this book is a board book, and again, that was also intentional. I work with kids who are on the spectrum, and working with kids on the spectrum, you want to have things that are durable. You also want to kind of have like a nice sensory feel with the pages as well. It encourages book interaction. And also it's sturdy. And so, some of the students who I work with like to kind of hear how their fingers sound against the pages, right? And so, we feed the need. I encourage the sensories or the sensation that's being sought. And so distributors, I haven't found a good one that will print board books. And so, I have been the one that has been like getting these books printed, taking them to independent bookstores or larger bookstores and sharing the good word about BAM, to see if that's something that they'd be interested in having on their shelves. So distribution is very much so grassroots right now. It's a labor of love, but I'm really optimistic that it'll get into the right hands so that it gets into more of the right hands.
Oh, yeah. I see this developing into an animated series. The world's your oyster with this, and it's going to be an effective tool for so many kids. I know personally that you're a newlywed and you're starting so many new chapters in your life. And our final question with Up Your Smile game is, when is your smile the brightest?
I would say it is, of course, it has to do with love, right? But not just in the romantic sense. It
Aww.
has to do when I'm doing things that I love, when I'm talking to people who I love, when I'm talking about things that I love.
Yeah.
That is when my smile is the brightest. So I won't pigeonhole it just to one person. I know my husband's going to be like, "How can you judge me?" Well, in essence, I am, but I think it has to do with the love that I share with my family, with my friends, with colleagues, with the teams that I work with the children that I work with. You'll hear some really hearty laughs when I'm in a therapy session because some of these kids really are hilarious, and when they finally get something, their new view of understanding is so nostalgic and heartwarming, because it calls back to like when you first figured something out, when you first learned the definition of this new word or how to say this word, or you use this word in a new setting and you have that sense of accomplishment and you get to relive that, and share in that victory with them, whether you're working with an adolescent or a toddler or when you're working with an adult. I think both evoke that sense of joy, that sense of love. And I think that is definitely when my smile is the brightest.
It's so true. And especially I see it. I see it in you and discussing your work. Your smile is just, illuminated. I and that's so powerful and meaningful. Finding what you love. And some people, they don't even realize it. I listen to patients all day long and I see them light up, when they talk about maybe a trip they took, or growing their family, or venturing outside of the norm and starting a business that nobody thought was possible. So thank you so much for sharing your journey. We're excited to continue to learn about everything else you're doing. In the show notes, we're going to have everything for Michelyve's practice, where you can find BAM, and just learning more about the importance of speech language pathology and tools to help your family, your students, your loved ones develop that skill set. So thank you so much. Is there anything you want to add? Do you want anything you want our listeners to know?
No, I really appreciate you guys taking the time to watch this video and learn more about me and Dr. White and all the amazing work that she's doing. And so I will leave you with this. I will say, never, this is so cliche, but never kind of give up on those dreams that you have. I think that setbacks truly are your setup for success. And it could be that very setback that gives you the fuel that you need to really drive your lane and leave your mark in that lane. So I would encourage any listeners with that message.
That's perfect. And I agree. There's no failure. There's just growth. I mean, Michelyve and I are both Philly girls. We're from Philly. We're from the inner city. We went to
Hey.
public high school. And look at us now. So now it's time for us to lift each other up, to elevate each other's success, and to just enjoy every part of the journey. And whether it is the the little pebbles that build up into rocks that take us to the highest peak. Every step is important. So you guys enjoy the rest of your day and check out more from Up Your Smile Game. Bye.
Bye.